Halfland, an ahistorical prehistory. The Battle of Hallgi's Hill. In the 166th year of the Common Reckoning, Ingildrifa burst into the Geitsmark, marching into Geitspin unopposed. Hallgi, the king of the Geitsmark, fled to Bensby, where he prepared to make a final stand. Hallgi gathered what forces he could, but few were willing to fight for him. A dwarvish warrior swore fealty to a lord who would provide generously for the warrior's upkeep. In return, the warrior would fight for his lord without wavering, until either a glorious victory was won, or the warrior died a glorious death at his lord's side. Dwarves had a keen sense of loyalty and honour. To desert your lord to save your own skin, even to abandon his corpse to the enemy once a battle was lost, was to be forever held in universal contempt. But the lord had to keep his side of the bargain. A dwarvish warrior expected his efforts to be rewarded with gold as well as with glory, and Hallgi had a well-earned reputation for being somewhat parsimonious. Thus it was that Hallgi was only able to assemble a force of 250 armoured warriors. Some 150 of these were shield-bearing spear dwarves. Supporting them were 100 crossbow dwarves. There were also 100 unarmoured dwarves equipped with shield and axe. These were levies from the area around Bensby. Hallgi's great-grandfather Hammond had been made the Thane of Bensby by King Granny of the Geitsmark some 80 years previously. Hammond had subsequently married Granny's niece and ended up as king himself. But he and his heirs had retained the title of Thane of Bensby, and this had enabled Hallgi to enlist a modicum of local support. A few miles outside Bensby, the road from Geitspin passed a small hill. This was the ground that Hallgi selected to give battle. He drew up his troops on the summit, the crossbow dwarves to his left and the levies to his right, with the spear dwarves forming a second line behind. Directly in front of the hill clustered a stand of trees known as Borkswood, with a small holding off to the left. Ingildrifa had a larger army than Hallgi, but not much larger. She had aimed to win the victory through speed and surprise. To that end, she had not lingered in Geitspin, but closely pursued the fleeing king, aiming to run him down and swiftly slay him. Her force included 300 mail-clad shield-bearing spear dwarves, split into 2 companies of 150, one of which she led in person, while the other was under the command of her grandson, Bina. Supporting the spear dwarves were 150 miscellaneous unarmoured missile troops, dwarves with crossbows and halfling mercenaries with bows or slings, all under the command of Fat Mags, the famous fighting halfling. As was usual with Ingildrifa, her battle plan was simple and direct. Fat Mags and his company would advance through Borkswood and line up at the forest edge, from where they would launch clouds of missiles up the hill and into Hallgi's lines. While Hallgi was thus distracted, the 2 companies of spear dwarves would charge up the hill and into his flanks in a pincer movement. Ingildrifa wasted no time putting her plan into effect. Fat Mag's contingent moved through the trees, the halflings silent and nimble, while the dwarves alongside them crashed and blundered their way through the undergrowth. To their left, Bina and his spear dwarves moved forward in the open, skirting the forest edge, and on their right, Ingildrifa's spear dwarfs advanced through the gap between Borkswood and the fields of the farm. From the top of the hill, Hallgi saw his foes approaching and ordered his crossbow dwarves to direct a volley of bolts into Ingildrifa's advancing spear dwarves. The shooting was accurate and effective. Heavy crossbow bolts punched through shields and mail. Many of the surviving spear dwarves backed away. The more stalwart held their ground that was now littered with the corpses of their comrades. Ingildrifa shouted orders, turning a threatened rout into an orderly retreat, regrouping her troops and reforming their shattered lines before driving them forward once more. And now Hallgi played his next card. As Fat Mag's soldiery reached the forest edge, they were greeted by the sight of the Bensby levies charging down the hill, axes swinging. Halfling hands fumbled for arrows and slingshot, but too slowly. Hallgi's dwarves fell upon them and wreaked red ruin. The surviving halflings fled back into the forest. On Ingildrifa's left, Bina and his spear dwarves continued to advance toward the hill. Hallgi moved his spear dwarves forward to face them, taking up the position previously occupied by the levies. Having seen off the halflings, the levies now turned to their right and advanced toward the flank of Bina's formation. Bina ordered his spear dwarves to halt, not wishing to walk into a trap. But the trap was starting to close. Hallgi ordered his spear dwarves to advance once more, descending the hill, descending toward Bina, who was now being menaced by two enemy formations. But not for long. Deep within the shady confines of Borkswood, Fat Mags had rallied his trembling halflings and brought them back to the forest edge, where they rejoined Fat Mag's crossbow dwarves, who had so far played no active part in the proceedings. The reconstituted company started to loose missiles into the rear of Hallgi's levies, hoping to avenge their fallen friends and relieve some of the pressure on Bina. In the former they failed. In the latter they succeeded only too well. The levy troops wheeled to face their annoyingly persistent foes, and then charged into them a second time, and yet more of Fat Mag's lads were mercilessly slaughtered. Freed for the moment from the threat posed by the levies, Bina ordered his spear dwarves to charge into those of Hallgi. The two lines of armoured warriors crashed together, stabbing spears, trying to find a way to bypass shields and thrust through mail into the flesh beneath. Back under the eaves of Borkswood, Fat Mags and the rapidly reducing body of troops remaining to him were fighting a desperate battle for survival, outnumbered and overmatched by the remorseless axes of the Bensby levies. But Ingildrifa observed Fat Mag's plight and came to his assistance. Her spear dwarves charged across the face of the forest and into the flank of Fat Mag's foes. Startled by the unexpected arrival of this new adversary, the levies paused their onslaught, allowing Fat Mags and the very small number of his surviving companions to disengage and join the ranks of their rescuers. At the foot of the hill, Bina and Hallgi's spear dwarves had each fought the other to an inconclusive standstill. Bina ordered his dwarves to fall back, to redress their ranks, catch their breath, and prepare for the next round. It would have been a good plan if Hallgi had done likewise, but he did not. Instead, seeing Bina's spear dwarves withdrawing, Hallgi urged his spear dwarves to one last effort, sending them charging headlong into Bina's ranks, sweeping all before them, breaking Bina's shield wall. Bina and those fighting alongside him were submerged by a wave of foes that surged over them. The butt of a spear struck a ringing blow on Bina's helmet, and Bina fell senseless to the ground. To their eternal disgrace, the remainder of Bina's spear dwarves broke and ran. Even as these events had taken place, Ingeldrifa's spear dwarves had been battling with Hallgi's levies. The levies were frenzied with the joy of killing, but Ingeldrifa's spear dwarves had the superior equipment, and although the levies pushed the spear dwarves back into Borkswood, they paid a heavy price for doing so. Ingeldrifa was holding her own. Had Bina done likewise, she might yet have won the day, but the rout of Bina's spear dwarves put paid to any such hope. Accompanied by fat Mags and a few companions, she fled the field. Hallgi stood triumphant over Bina's prostrate form, exulting in his victory. He poked Bina's body with his foot. Bina stirred. Two of Hallgi's spear dwarves grabbed Bina by the upper arms and raised him to his feet, supporting him as he groggily swayed to and fro. Hallgi gave a curt order, and a dazed and concussed Bina was dragged away. Thus did Ingeldrifa pay the price for her recklessness. Thus was Bina taken prisoner, and thus ended the Battle of Hallgi's Hill.